We're on to the men's game now. Alex Barth, Dan Budick here to break this one down for you. We're about 5 minutes to tip off as the teams are finishing warming up. But let's start going back to last night. Ithaca, Utica, great game for the Bombers when they needed coming off a loss.
They needed that win coming off a tough loss to St. John Fisher, obviously the first place team in the Empire 8 Conference. But what did the Bombers do last night, Alex? They guarded the perimeter, and they were able to get rebounds, especially at the guard position.
Yeah, and it's not often that you see the small guys come through. I believe they have 18 rebounds from the 2 starting guards. It's not often you see that. It's not a normal contribution. It's not necessarily something you count on, but it's great when you get it.
How about Max Masucci? 10 rebounds, a career high for them. That was the big X factor for the Bombers last night, and also a double-double by Keith Giddo.
Giddo, another double-double. He has been so dominant for this team this year. They had issues. They had a number of players not return from last year. They lost Leonard Davis mid-season. He quit. Keith Giddo has just put this team on his back. He looks like he's going to carry them kicking and screaming into the playoffs.
And last night against Utica, they had no answer for a guy to guard against him. At time, they were putting Carl Taylor on him, who was standing at 5'9".
And again, tonight, they're going to have another tough matchup. Let's take a look at what's going on tonight in the Empire 8 and around upstate New York. We got a few games going on. The big one here, Ithaca and Nazareth. Fisher is in action again tonight, that number 1 team again, 9-0. They are 3 games ahead of everybody else. Stevens and Harwick round out the top 4 of the Empire 8. As it is right now, those teams are about 3 or 4 behind St. John Fisher. Who has the best shot to catch the Cardinals?
Well, I think right now it's the Bombers. If you look at the conference, the Bombers, perfect 9-9 record. They've played really well this year, and they've done a lot of nice things, like you mentioned, with Keith Giddo guarding the boards. There hasn't been a lot of players that could guard Keith Giddo, who stands at 6'8".
So let's go on to tonight. One big note we have right now, this just in, Josh Gilliard out, the 6th man for Nazareth, averages 7 points a game. He's the team's 4th leading scorer. He does not play. They found this out just before game time. Didn't have a lot of time to game plan for it. Something happened last night. How does Nazareth adjust? How much this is going to hurt them?
Well, I think we'll see the difference in the second half. You mentioned Gilliard, their 4th leading scorer. When guys need minutes off the bench and he comes in at the guard position, he gives their guys rest. It's going to be tough to find points elsewhere in the second half.
Let's take a look at what happened in Nazareth last night. Take a look at how they fared out against St. John Fisher, the leading team in the conference. They held close. They closed it to within 7 a couple times in the second half, but could not get the final shot to fall. They fell by close to 20 points. So now the Bombers have Nazareth coming in off a tough loss. They had lost a game, now a win, coming back, momentum. How do they avoid being tonight what Utica was last night as a stepping stone to get over a bad loss?
Well, they have to get going early. We saw Utica get off to an early start against the Bombers last night. They weren't able to hold it. The Bombers came in, Jim Mullins had a great game plan, and their coaching staff came in, took the lead, and the Bombers never looked back.
Who has to step up for the Bombers today if they want to win this game?
Well, I think it's Keith Giddo. You mentioned it. He's the size differential. He's the difference factor, the difference maker for the Ithaca College Bombers men's basketball team. But also guys like Mark Chasen and Carroll Rich, who had 15 points last night. The guards really were an impact last night for the Bombers.
Now, freshman class, how big of an impact can they have today?
Well, I think the freshman class is huge, Alex. I think when you talk about guys like Carroll Rich, you talk about Mark Chasen. Those guys have played tremendous for the Bombers last night. Both guys double-digit points. They need those guys to score points if they want to beat Nazareth today.
And as we take a look at some of the key stats here, something you're going to see in there is field goal percentage. Part of the reason the Bombers excel is because they're good underneath. Keith Giddo, we talked about him earlier. We've seen him throw down a couple of times this year, something we're not familiar to here at Ithaca. How many dunks can we expect from Keith Giddo tonight, do you think?
Well, last night he had 1, Alex. I think you could see a few. Again, the size differential is huge. Nazareth only have height up to 6'4", 6'5" on their roster like Utica did last night. Keith Giddo, like we mentioned, stands at 6'8". They're really going to need someone to really power him under the boards, but I don't think they're going to be able to do it.
And who else? Let's look off the bench for the Bombers because it is the second night of a back-to-back. They did go a full 40 minutes last night. That game was close to the wire. Who off the bench maybe do you see could come in and on day 2 of a doubleheader give the Bombers some help?
Well, what I really liked last night, I mentioned on the broadcast when I was on Will LeBlanc, I really like Carroll Rich. Guy's quick, he's got moves underneath the basket, and he's not afraid to take the 3-point ball. A freshman, raw, but I like what we've seen out of him.
And he's somebody who's really stood up in the loss of Leonard Davis. Like we mentioned, he left the team part way through the season. You look at the coaching staff. The Bombers have sort of played a different game plan in the second half of this season than they did before we left for the new year. Can you kind of talk about that new game plan?
Well, I think their game plan really is guarding the perimeter defensively. The man-on-man defense like we've seen. Usually Bombers coach teams very good defensively, and I don't think there's any different this year. One thing I think we see more of the Bombers, I think we see more of a passing game. Sam Bevins had 10 assists last night. They need that kind of ball mobility if they want to win and compete in the Empire 8.
So as we get ready for this one, again, St. John Fisher will be in action later as we wait for the Bombers. You mentioned Ithaca has a good chance to catch St. John Fisher. You think the best chance in the Empire 8. They've already lost to them twice, which means the Bombers are more or less going to have to win out. Not just tonight, but big picture. One big change the Bombers have to make, or one player that has to step up.
One player that has to step up for the Bombers, I think you talk about underneath. It's Johansson and Keith Giddo. They're the X factors underneath the basket for the Bombers.
Thank you very much, Dan. We're just about out of time as teams are getting ready for the starting lineups. We'll throw it up to the booth where Mia O'Brien and Jake Asman have the call. It's Bombers men's basketball, Ithaca Nazareth, right here on ICTV.